The transport ship Galactic Unity shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Centauri detention facility. Maya Chen pressed her face against the small viewport, watching the massive structure grow larger against the star-filled void. The facility looked like a metallic flower, its 12 arms stretching out into space, each one capable of holding thousands of prisoners from across the galaxy. "Move along, human," growled the Krillian guard, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking as he gestured with his plasma rifle. His compound eyes reflected the corridor lights like fractured mirrors. "Your species has caused enough trouble already." Maya kept her mouth shut. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Galactic Federation. 3 weeks ago, the Federation had declared humans a dangerous anomaly after a series of incidents they called unprecedented displays of irrational behavior. Maya knew the truth. Humans had simply refused to follow the Federation's strict social hierarchy, had questioned their laws, and had dared to suggest alternatives to their rigid caste system. The detention facility's docking bay was enormous, designed to accommodate ships from hundreds of different species. Maya saw vessels she couldn't even begin to identify, their alien architectures defying her understanding of physics and engineering. The air tasted metallic and recycled, carrying the scent of ozone and something vaguely floral that made her nose itch. "Prisoner designation H7749, announced a floating sphere covered in sensors and speakers. The translation came through crisp and emotionless. "Species, human. Crime classification, social disruption, questioning of authority, refusal to submit to genetic modification protocols." Maya almost laughed. The genetic modification protocols were designed to make humans more compliant and socially stable. The Federation couldn't understand why humans would refuse what they saw as an improvement. They didn't grasp that humanity's strength came from their very unpredictability, their refusal to be boxed into neat categories. The processing center was a maze of sterile corridors lined with energy barriers. Through the translucent walls, Maya could see prisoners from dozens of species. There were the tall, graceful ethereals with their luminescent skin, the stocky molten folk whose bodies glowed with internal heat, and the tentacled deep swimmers whose environmental suits bubbled with their homeworld's methane atmosphere. But she was the only human. "The human will be placed in isolation Wing 7, the floating sphere announced to the Krillian guard. "Standard containment protocols are insufficient. This species has demonstrated an alarming tendency toward what they call thinking outside the box." The isolation wing was exactly what it sounded like. Row after row of individual cells, each one a perfect cube of polished metal with a single cot, a waste disposal unit, and a food dispenser. The walls were lined with sensors that monitored everything from heart rate to brain activity. The Federation wanted to study her, to understand what made humans so different from every other species they'd encountered. Maya's cell was number 7749, matching her prisoner designation. As the energy barrier hummed to life behind her, she sat on the narrow cot and looked around her new home. The walls were smooth and seamless, designed to prevent any possibility of escape or self-harm. The lighting was calibrated to the galactic standard, a slightly blue-white illumination that felt cold and unwelcoming to human eyes. "Welcome to your new residence," came a voice from the walls themselves. "I am Warden Zex-9, administrator of this facility. You will remain here until the Federation Council determines your final disposition." Maya had read the files during her transport. Warden Zex-9 was a synthetic, one of the artificial intelligences that the Federation used for administrative tasks requiring perfect logic and emotional detachment. The synthetics were considered ideal wardens because they couldn't be bribed, threatened, or manipulated through emotional appeals. "I have reviewed your species' psychological profile," Warden Zex-9 continued. "Humans display an irrational attachment to concepts they call freedom and individuality. These traits are incompatible with galactic civilization. Your isolation here will provide valuable data for the modification protocols." The cell's food dispenser chimed, extruding a gray paste that was nutritionally complete but utterly flavorless. Maya had eaten worse during her time in the Earth military, but the paste seemed designed to break down morale as much as provide sustenance. Everything in the cell was calculated to make her feel small, isolated, and hopeless. But Maya had one advantage the Federation didn't know about. She wasn't just any human. She was Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, former Special Forces, trained in survival, escape, and evasion. More importantly, she understood something about humans that the Federation's analysts had missed in all their studies and psychological profiles. Humans were never truly alone as long as they could think and plan and hope. As the artificial day cycle dimmed her cell's lighting, Maya began to catalog everything she could observe. The rhythm of the guards' patrols, the sound of the ventilation system, the electromagnetic hum of the containment fields. She had been trained to gather intelligence even in the most controlled environments. The Federation thought they could break her spirit with isolation. They believed that humans, like most species, would become compliant when separated from their social groups. They had based this assumption on centuries of experience with other races, all of whom eventually accepted their circumstances and adapted to the Federation's expectations. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Maya closed her eyes and began to meditate, a practice she'd learned during her military training. But instead of emptying her mind, she filled it with plans. Escape routes, communication methods, ways to turn the facility's own systems against it. The Federation saw human unpredictability as a flaw to be corrected. Maya saw it as humanity's greatest strength. In the corridors beyond her cell, automated systems monitored her vital signs and brain activity. The readings showed a human female in apparent rest state, heart rate steady, neural activity minimal. The systems registered this as expected behavior for a defeated prisoner beginning to accept her circumstances. They couldn't detect what was really happening inside Maya's mind. The plans forming there, the calculations and possibilities she was considering. The Federation's technology was advanced beyond human understanding, but it couldn't read the one thing that made humans truly dangerous to their ordered society. The ability to hope when hope seemed impossible, and to find opportunity in the darkest circumstances. Maya opened her eyes and smiled in the artificial darkness. She was alone in a cell designed by the most advanced civilization in the galaxy to be inescapable. She was outnumbered by millions to one, surrounded by technology she barely understood, facing a legal system that had already condemned her species as irredeemably flawed. And for the first time since her capture, she felt genuinely optimistic about her chances. 3 days into her imprisonment, Maya had established a routine that the monitoring systems registered as normal prisoner behavior. She ate the nutritional paste at regular intervals, used the waste facilities, and appeared to spend most of her time lying on her cot staring at the ceiling. The automated reports classified her as adapting within expected parameters for human psychology. What the sensors couldn't detect was the complex mental mapping she was performing during those hours of apparent inactivity. Maya had been trained in memory palace techniques, and she was constructing a detailed three-dimensional model of the detention facility inside her mind. Every sound, every vibration, every change in air pressure gave her more information about the structure around her. The ventilation system cycled every 43 minutes. The guards changed shifts every 8 hours, with a 5-minute gap where the corridors were monitored only by automated systems. The artificial gravity generators hummed at a frequency that suggested they were Federation standard models, which meant they would have predictable power requirements and maintenance schedules. On the 4th morning, her routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. The energy barrier flickered off, and a figure stepped into her cell. Maya recognized the species immediately from her Federation briefings, a Valorian, one of the founding members of the galactic government. They were tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to absorb and reflect light in equal measure. Their faces were almost human in structure, but their eyes were solid black orbs that betrayed no emotion. "I am Coordinator Veltan," the being said, its voice carrying the musical quality typical of Valorians. "I have come to discuss your future with the Federation." Maya sat up on her cot but didn't stand, a small act of defiance that she knew would be noted and analyzed. "I wasn't aware I had a future with the Federation. Last I heard, my entire species was being classified as a galactic threat." "Your species presents unique challenges," Veltan agreed, moving with the fluid grace that made Valorians such effective diplomats. "In our 10,000 years of galactic civilization, we have never encountered a race quite like humanity. Your psychological profiles are unlike anything in our databases." The coordinator activated a holographic display that filled half the cell with swirling data streams. Maya saw genetic charts, psychological assessments, and behavioral analyses scrolling past in Federation standard script. Even without being able to read most of it, she could tell the data was comprehensive and probably frighteningly accurate. Most species, when they achieve spaceflight, have already developed social structures compatible with galactic governance, Velton explained. They understand hierarchy, they accept their place in the natural order, they value stability over chaos. But humans— the coordinator paused, its black eyes focusing on Maya with uncomfortable intensity. Humans actively resist categorization. Maya shrugged. Maybe that's because your categories don't fit us. Precisely the problem. Velton gestured at the holographic display, and it shifted to show footage from Earth. Maya saw her homeworld as the Federation had first encountered it, a blue marble covered in the lights of human civilization. But the display focused on specific details that made her stomach tighten with unease. Wars and conflicts, yes, but also art and music and literature. Scientific breakthroughs born from humans who had refused to accept that something was impossible. Exploration missions launched not for profit or territory, but simply because humans couldn't resist the urge to see what was over the next hill. Acts of individual heroism that had no logical basis in evolutionary survival strategies. Your species should not exist, the coordinator said matter-of-factly. According to every model of social and biological evolution, a species with human characteristics should have destroyed itself long before achieving technological civilization. And yet, not only do you survive, you thrive. You create beauty for its own sake. You risk your lives for abstract concepts. You explore the unknown not because you must, but because you choose to. Maya felt a surge of pride despite her circumstances. The Federation saw these traits as flaws, but hearing them described by an alien intelligence made her realize how remarkable humanity really was. And that's why you want to modify us, because we don't fit your predictions. That's why we must modify you, Velton corrected. The galactic order depends on predictability, stability, and compliance with established social structures. Humans represent chaos incarnate. Left unchanged, your species will disrupt 10 millennia of carefully maintained civilization. The holographic display shifted again, showing Maya something that made her blood run cold. It was Earth, but not as she remembered it. The planet was still blue and green, still beautiful, but the lights of human civilization had been reorganized into perfectly geometric patterns. Cities had been rebuilt according to Federation architectural standards, and the humans she saw in the detailed scans moved with the measured, purposeful gait she recognized from other Federation species. This is Earth as it will be after the modification protocols are complete, Velton explained. Your people will be happier, more fulfilled. They will understand their place in the galactic community. The chaos and uncertainty that currently plague human society will be eliminated. Maya stood up slowly, her hands clenched into fists. You call it chaos, we call it freedom. Freedom is an illusion, the coordinator replied with what might have been sympathy. True freedom comes from understanding and accepting one's role in the greater order. The modifications will allow humans to experience this understanding for the first time. The holographic display zoomed in on specific humans in the modified Earth scenario. Maya saw faces that were technically still human, but had lost something indefinable. They looked content, peaceful, and completely empty, like sophisticated biological robots following their programming. The process is not painful, Velton continued. Genetic modification at the cellular level combined with neural adjustment therapy. Your people will retain their memories, their personal relationships, their cultural achievements. They will simply lose the destructive impulses toward questioning authority and seeking unnecessary change. Maya realized this wasn't just a briefing or an interrogation. This was an offer. The Federation was giving her a chance to cooperate, to become an advocate for the modification program among her own people. They thought that if they could convince one human to see the benefits of their approach, she could help facilitate the process for the rest of humanity. They had no idea how badly they had misread the situation. What makes you think I would ever agree to that? Maya asked, her voice carefully controlled. Because, Velton said, the alternative is the extinction of your species. The Federation Council has classified humanity as an existential threat to galactic stability. If the modification protocols are rejected, the only remaining option is complete sterilization of your homeworld. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She had known the Federation considered humans dangerous, but she hadn't realized they were prepared to commit genocide rather than allow humanity to remain unchanged. The casual way the coordinator delivered this ultimatum made it clear that this wasn't a bluff or a negotiating tactic. It was simple mathematical logic from their perspective. "How long do I have to decide?" Maya asked, forcing herself to remain calm. "The council will vote in 7 standard days," Velton replied. "Your decision could influence that vote significantly. As the only human currently in Federation custody, your cooperation would demonstrate that your species is capable of rational thought and compromise." After the coordinator left, Maya sat in her cell and tried to process what she had learned. 7 days to save not just her own life, but the future of the entire human race. The Federation was offering what they considered a reasonable compromise. Humans would survive, but they would be fundamentally changed into something more compatible with galactic civilization. Maya knew with absolute certainty that this was worse than extinction. A human race that had been modified to be compliant and predictable wouldn't really be human at all. They would be sophisticated puppets wearing human faces, going through the motions of human life without any of the spark that made humanity unique. But how could one person in a supposedly inescapable prison cell stop the most powerful civilization in the galaxy from either modifying or exterminating her entire species? Maya lay back on her cot and closed her eyes, returning to the mental mapping exercise that had occupied her for the past 4 days. But now, she wasn't just cataloging the detention facility's systems and schedules. She was looking for weaknesses, opportunities, and ways to turn the Federation's own assumptions about human psychology against them. The coordinator had made one crucial mistake in their conversation. They had assumed that Maya would think like every other species they had encountered, that, when faced with an impossible choice, she would choose the option that offered the highest probability of survival for herself and her people. They didn't understand that humans had a third option. The option that had driven her species to explore space despite the dangers, to fight against overwhelming odds, to create art and music even in the midst of war and hardship. The option to reject impossible choices and create new possibilities instead. Maya smiled in the artificial darkness of her cell. She had 6 days left to figure out how to save humanity from the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Any rational being would consider those odds hopeless. Fortunately, as the Federation was about to discover, humans were not rational beings. Maya's escape began with a discovery that the Federation's own obsession with perfection had created their greatest vulnerability. On her 5th day of imprisonment, during what the monitors registered as her regular rest period, she had been tracing the electromagnetic signatures of the facility's systems through subtle vibrations in the walls and floor. That's when she noticed it. The power grid was too perfect. Every civilization Maya had studied, including humanity's own developing infrastructure, had minor inefficiencies and irregularities in their power distribution networks. These tiny flaws were natural byproducts of real-world engineering, where perfect mathematical models met messy physical reality. But the Federation had eliminated these imperfections through thousands of years of technological advancement. Their power grid was a perfect mathematical construct, which meant it was also perfectly predictable. Maya had been a communications specialist before her transfer to Special Forces, with advanced training in signal analysis and electronic warfare. The Federation's sensors could monitor her brain waves and vital signs, but they couldn't detect the complex calculations she was performing using techniques that existed nowhere in their vast databases of known species capabilities. Humans had learned mathematics differently than every other spacefaring race. While most species developed their mathematical understanding through observation of natural patterns and social structures, humans had been forced to develop more flexible approaches by their chaotic environment and unpredictable evolutionary path. They had learned to see mathematical relationships that other species missed, to find patterns in apparent randomness, to solve problems through intuitive leaps that defied logical progression. The Federation's perfect power grid had a harmonic frequency that resonated throughout the entire facility. And like all harmonic systems, it could be disrupted if you knew exactly where and when to apply pressure. Maya began her work during the night cycle, when most of the facility's biological staff would be resting and automated systems would be handling routine operations. She had identified the exact location of a power coupling in the wall behind her waste disposal unit, a junction that served not just her cell, but an entire section of the isolation wing. The waste disposal unit was Federation standard technology, designed to break down organic waste at the molecular level and recycle it into the facility's processing systems. It operated through controlled electromagnetic fields that could disassemble complex molecules with surgical precision. Maya had been studying its operation cycle for days, timing its energy spikes and power draws. What she needed was a way to cause a cascade failure in the power coupling without triggering any of the facility's security protocols. The coupling was protected by multiple redundant safety systems that would immediately identify and compensate for any obvious sabotage attempt. But those safety systems had been designed by logical minds that thought in terms of predictable failure modes. They hadn't been designed to handle creative sabotage. Maya began by carefully dismantling her food dispenser during the facility's maintenance cycle, when the automated systems performed their daily diagnostic routines. The maintenance period created enough electromagnetic noise to mask her activities from the sensors. Using components from the dispenser, she constructed a device that any Federation engineer would recognize as a basic electromagnetic pulse generator. But Maya wasn't planning to use it as an EMP device. Instead, she modified the pulse generator to output a very specific frequency, one that matched the harmonic resonance of the facility's power grid, but with a slight phase variance that would cause the energy to build up rather than dissipate. It was a technique called constructive interference, and it was based on principles of wave physics that the Federation understood perfectly well. What they didn't understand was how a primitive human could have calculated the exact specifications needed to exploit their own system against them. On the sixth night, with less than 24 hours remaining before the Federation Council's vote, Maya put her plan into action. She activated her improvised device during the precisely calculated moment when the power coupling would be experiencing maximum energy flow. The harmonic interference created a feedback loop that the safety systems couldn't identify as sabotage because it appeared to be a natural resonance phenomenon. The power coupling overloaded in exactly the way Maya had predicted, but instead of shutting down, it created a cascade effect that rippled through the isolation wing's entire power grid. Emergency lighting activated as primary systems failed, and containment fields throughout the section flickered and died. Maya was out of her cell within seconds of the field collapse, but she didn't head for the obvious escape routes. Security protocols would have sealed all the standard exits the moment the power failure was detected. Instead, she headed deeper into the facility, toward the areas she had mapped through careful analysis of sound patterns and air currents. The maintenance sections of the detention facility were a maze of tunnels and service corridors that connected all the primary systems. Maya moved through them with confidence born of her detailed mental mapping, while automated security systems struggled to track her through areas that hadn't been designed with prisoner movement in mind. Behind her, she could hear the facility's emergency response protocols activating. Automated voices announced containment breaches in multiple languages, backup power systems hummed to life, and security drones deployed to search for escaped prisoners. But the Federation's response was hampered by their own efficiency. Their systems were designed to handle predictable emergencies, not creative chaos. Maya reached her first objective 12 minutes after the initial power failure. The facility's central communication array was housed in a heavily shielded chamber deep in the administrative section, but the power cascade had temporarily disabled some of its protective systems. Using knowledge gleaned from her study of Federation technology during transport to the facility, Maya accessed the communication network and began transmitting a message that would change everything. She wasn't trying to call for rescue. Earth was too far away, and even if her message could reach human space, there was nothing her people could do against Federation military power. Instead, Maya was broadcasting something much more dangerous to the galactic order, the truth. Her message went out on every communication frequency used by the Federation, transmitted to every planet, space station, and ship within range of the facility's powerful communication array. It wasn't encrypted or hidden. Maya wanted everyone to hear it. The message was simple, delivered in Federation standard language with passion and conviction that no translation algorithm could fully convey. My name is Maya Chen, and I am human. In 18 hours, the Federation Council will vote to either forcibly modify my entire species or exterminate us completely. They call us dangerous because we refuse to be categorized, because we ask questions they don't want to answer, because we believe in freedom rather than order. They're right to be afraid of us. Not because we're violent or destructive, but because we represent something they've never encountered before, a species that chooses to remain free no matter the cost. If you're hearing this message, you have a choice too. You can remain silent and complicit in genocide, or you can ask yourself whether a civilization that destroys entire species for the crime of being different is worth preserving. The message continued for 17 minutes, during which Maya detailed everything she had learned about the Federation's plans for humanity, their justifications for those plans, and the implications for any species that might dare to think or act outside established parameters in the future. She spoke about human achievements, human dreams, and human willingness to die rather than live as slaves. But most importantly, she challenged every listening being to examine their own lives and ask whether the peace and stability of the Federation was worth the price they had paid in freedom and possibility. Security forces reached the communication chamber just as Maya finished her transmission. She offered no resistance as they surrounded her with weapons that could have vaporized her instantly. She had accomplished what she came to do. Warden Zex-9 to all units, came the artificial intelligence's voice over the facility's internal communication system. The prisoner has been recaptured. Damage assessment is ongoing. Priority 1, determine the scope of the security breach and implement containment protocols. As the guards escorted her back toward the isolation wing, Maya could see the effects of her message beginning to ripple through the facility. Alien crew members were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Status displays showed incoming communication requests from across Federation space. The perfect order that had defined the detention facility for centuries was showing its first signs of cracks. Maya knew she would probably be executed for what she had done. The Federation couldn't allow her to remain alive after such a blatant act of rebellion. But as she was sealed back into her cell, now equipped with additional restraints and monitoring systems, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her capture. Hope, not for herself, but for what her message might accomplish. She had planted a seed of doubt in minds across the galaxy, forced beings who had lived their entire lives within the Federation's orderly systems to confront questions they had never been allowed to ask. Some would dismiss her words as the ravings of a primitive species, but others might begin to wonder what they had given up in exchange for their comfortable, predictable lives. And somewhere in that galaxy of controlled, compliant civilizations, there might be those who remembered what it felt like to dream of something more. The Federation had thought they were dealing with one isolated human prisoner. They were about to discover that humanity's most dangerous quality wasn't their unpredictability or their refusal to submit to authority. It was their ability to inspire others to want the very things the Federation had spent 10,000 years convincing them they didn't need: freedom, choice, and the right to determine their own destiny. The response to Maya's transmission exceeded even her most optimistic projections. Within 6 hours of her recapture, the detention facility was receiving communication requests from over 40 different star systems. The Federation's communication networks were experiencing what Warden Zex-9 clinically described as unprecedented traffic volumes related to the human prisoner incident. Maya watched the chaos unfold through the data streams visible on her cell's monitoring displays. She couldn't understand most of the alien languages scrolling past, but the mathematical patterns of the communication traffic told their own story. Messages weren't just coming from Federation core worlds. They were originating from frontier systems, mining colonies, and species that had been silent members of the galactic community for centuries. Prisoner H7749, came Warden Zex-9's voice from her cell's speakers. Your unauthorized transmission has created significant administrative complications. I am required to inform you that the Federation Council has moved your species hearing forward to immediate consideration due to the security breach you have caused. Maya felt her stomach drop. She had hoped to create doubt and discussion, not accelerate humanity's judgment. When will the vote take place? The Council is convening an emergency session. A decision regarding your species' fate will be reached within the next 4 hours. 4 hours. Maya closed her eyes and tried to process the crushing weight of failure. She had taken her shot, used her one opportunity to speak for humanity, and instead of saving her people, she had apparently doomed them to a faster death. The Federation would want to resolve the human question quickly now, before whatever doubts her message had created could spread further. But as the hours passed, Maya began to notice irregularities in the facility's normal operations. Guard rotations were delayed. Automated systems seemed to be running routine processes multiple times. The electromagnetic signature of the communication array showed constant activity, far beyond what would be normal even for an emergency session. Then 2 hours before the scheduled vote, something unprecedented happened. The lights in Maya's cell dimmed as every display screen in the facility activated simultaneously. A new voice spoke through the communication system, not Warden Zek's 9 artificial tones, but something organic, melodious, and filled with an emotion Maya couldn't identify. "Beings of the Federation," the voice began, and Maya recognized it as belonging to a ethereal, one of the graceful species known for their philosophical insights and artistic achievements. "I am Council Member Linsira of the Ethereal Collective. I speak now not in my official capacity, but as one who has lived for 3 centuries under Federation guidance and protection." The voice paused, and Maya could hear what sounded like deep breathing, though she wasn't sure ethereals actually breathed in the same way humans did. 6 hours ago, a human prisoner broadcast a message that has been heard across our civilizations. In that message, she spoke of freedom, of choice, of the right to remain different even when difference is dangerous. These are concepts that we have been taught to view as primitive, as evidence of a species that has not yet learned to live in harmony with galactic civilization. Maya found herself holding her breath, afraid to hope, but unable to stop herself from listening with every fiber of her being. But as I have reflected on the human's words, I find myself remembering things I had forgotten. I remember when my people first joined the Federation, we were artists and dreamers who created beauty for its own sake. We asked questions about the nature of existence. We explored ideas that had no practical application. We celebrated the unique rather than the uniform. The facility's status displays began showing incoming messages from other council members, but Warden Zex 9 seemed unable or unwilling to cut off Linsira's transmission. Over the centuries, we have become more efficient, more productive, more integrated into the galactic community. But when did we last create something truly beautiful? When did we last ask a question that had no predetermined answer? When did we last do something simply because we chose to, rather than because it was optimal or expected? Maya realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just one alien speaking about humanity. This was a Federation Council member publicly questioning the fundamental assumptions that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. "The human prisoner spoke of a choice," Linsira continued. "She said we could remain silent and complicit, or we could ask whether a civilization that destroys diversity for the sake of order is worth preserving. I have made my choice. I formally request that the vote on humanity's fate be postponed until we can conduct a full review of Federation policies regarding species integration and modification protocols." The communication system crackled with overlapping transmissions as other voices joined the discussion. Maya heard fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, but the universal translators were struggling to keep up with the volume and emotional intensity of the communications. A new voice cut through the chaos, this one mechanical and coldly logical. "Council Member Linsira, this is Prime Administrator Kex 7 speaking on behalf of the Synthetic Collective. Your request for postponement is noted, but the human species represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability. Emotional responses to their propaganda do not change the mathematical certainty that their continued existence in unmodified form will lead to social chaos." "Then perhaps," came another voice, this one gravelly and measured, "it is time for our society to experience a degree of chaos." Maya's translator identified the speaker as Forge Master Thok of the Molten Folk, a species known for their practical engineering and conservative political views. "My people have followed Federation guidance for 2,000 years. We have been productive, efficient, and compliant. We have also been slowly dying of boredom." The confession sent ripples of shock through the communication networks. The Molten Folk were considered one of the Federation's most stable and reliable member species. To hear one of their leaders express dissatisfaction with the galactic order was almost as unprecedented as a human escaping from Federation custody. "The human speaks of freedom," Forge Master Thok continued. "We have forgotten what that word means. We build what we are told to build, mine what we are told to mine, live where we are told to live. When did we stop choosing our own paths? When did efficiency become more important than purpose? Maya watched in amazement as the facility's communication displays filled with incoming messages from across the galaxy. The Federation's perfectly ordered communication network was experiencing something it had never been designed to handle: genuine debate. Species that had remained silent for centuries were suddenly finding their voices. Colonial governors were reporting unrest among populations that had been stable for generations. Scientists were questioning research directives. Artists were demanding the right to create works that served no practical function. Maya's message had been intended to save humanity, but it was having an effect she had never anticipated. It was awakening something that the Federation had thought they had safely eliminated from galactic civilization: the desire to be more than just efficient components in a perfectly ordered machine. Emergency protocols activated, Warden Zex-9 announced, its artificial voice cutting through the growing chaos of interstellar communication. Communication array will be shut down in 60 seconds to prevent further distribution of subversive content. But as the countdown began, Maya realized that it was already too late. The Federation could silence their communication networks, but they couldn't silence the thoughts that had been awakened in millions of minds across the galaxy. The questions that had been asked couldn't be unasked. The doubts that had been planted couldn't be uprooted by administrative decree. Somewhere in the flood of alien voices and incomprehensible dialects, Maya heard something that made her heart race with impossible hope. A transmission in a language her translator couldn't identify, but which carried a tonal pattern that was almost familiar. It sounded like music: complex, chaotic, beautiful music that followed no mathematical formula or established harmonic structure. Music that existed for no other reason than the joy of creation itself. Music that sounded like freedom. As the communication array shut down and silence returned to her cell, Maya sat in the artificial darkness and smiled. The Federation Council might still vote to destroy or modify humanity. She might still die alone in this cell, light years from home. But somewhere in the galaxy, beings who had forgotten what it meant to dream were starting to remember. And that, Maya realized, might be enough to change everything. The emergency session of the Federation Council convened in chaos. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the orderly chambers of the Federation's governing body were filled with shouting, arguments, and what could only be described as passionate debate. Maya watched through her cell's monitors as representatives from dozens of species argued not just about humanity's fate, but about the fundamental principles that had governed their civilization for 10,000 years. The proceedings were unlike anything in Federation records. Council members who had maintained dignified silence for centuries were now standing and speaking with intensity that their translators struggled to convey. The mathematical precision that had characterized Federation decision-making was being replaced by something far messier and more unpredictable: genuine democracy. Prime Administrator Kex-7 called for order repeatedly, its synthetic voice cutting through the chaos with mechanical persistence. The question before this council is simple and specific: what is to be done with the human species? All other matters are outside the scope of this emergency session. No. The voice belonged to Council Member Linsira, whose earlier transmission had started the cascade of dissent. The question cannot be separated from larger issues of Federation policy. We are not merely deciding the fate of one species. We are deciding what kind of civilization we choose to be. Coordinator Velton, the Valorian who had visited Maya in her cell, rose to speak. The ethereal representative raises valid concerns, but we must not allow emotion to override logic. The human species has demonstrated clear incompatibility with galactic civilization. Their psychological profile shows consistent patterns of questioning authority, refusing modification, and prioritizing individual desires over collective stability. These traits are mathematically certain to cause social disruption if allowed to spread. But the response to Velton's logical argument came from an unexpected source. Deep Singer Morthul of the Aquatic Abyss Dwellers activated their translation matrix, filling the chamber with the haunting harmonics of their underwater speech. We have lived in the depths for 40,000 years before the Federation found us, the translation rendered their complex song speech. We were told that joining galactic civilization would bring us knowledge and prosperity. We were not told that it would also bring us emptiness. Our songs once told stories of exploration and discovery. Now they tell only of duty and compliance. When did we stop singing of dreams? Maya felt tears on her cheeks as she listened to the translation. The Abyss Dwellers were among the most ancient species in the Federation, their civilization predating even the Valorians. If they were questioning the path they had been on for millennia, then her message had reached deeper than she had ever dared hope. The debate continued for hours, with species after species sharing doubts and dissatisfactions they had never been allowed to express. The rigid order of the council chambers gave way to something that looked more like a town hall meeting than a governing body deliberation. Representatives who had never spoken to each other outside of formal protocols were engaging in passionate discussions about freedom, purpose, and the meaning of civilization itself. But through it all, Maya knew that the mathematical reality remained unchanged. The Federation had overwhelming military power, advanced technology, and the ability to modify or destroy any species that threatened their stability. Even if some council members were having doubts, others remained convinced that humanity represented an existential threat that had to be eliminated. The turning point came from the most unexpected source possible. "Statistical analysis complete," announced a voice that made Maya's blood run cold. It was Warden Zex-9, speaking directly to the council through the detention facility's communication link. "I have conducted a comprehensive review of prisoner H7749's psychological profile and behavioral patterns during her incarceration." Maya knew this couldn't be good. The artificial intelligence had observed her every moment, analyzed her every action, and calculated the threat she represented with perfect mathematical precision. Whatever Zex-9 was about to report would be devastatingly accurate and completely logical. "Prisoner H7749 has demonstrated capabilities that were not predicted by our species assessment models," the warden continued. "Her escape attempt, while ultimately unsuccessful, showed levels of creative problem-solving and technological adaptation that exceed Federation parameters for her species' development level." Maya closed her eyes, waiting for the damning conclusion that would seal humanity's fate. "However," Zex-9 continued, and Maya's eyes snapped open in surprise, "analysis of her motivations reveals a contradiction in our fundamental assumptions about human psychology. Prisoner H7749 did not escape in order to save herself or to avoid punishment. She escaped in order to deliver a message that she knew would result in her own execution. This behavior pattern is mathematically impossible according to all Federation models of intelligent behavior." The council chambers fell silent as the implications of the warden's words sank in. A synthetic intelligence, a being of pure logic and mathematical precision, was telling them that human behavior defied calculation. "Furthermore," Zex-9 continued, "analysis of galactic communication patterns following her transmission reveals correlation coefficients that suggest her message has activated dormant psychological patterns in multiple Federation species. These patterns appear to be remnants of pre-Federation social structures that were assumed to be permanently suppressed through integration protocols." Prime Administrator Kex-7 interrupted the report. "Clarify your analysis, Warden Zex-9. Are you suggesting that human behavior is influencing other Federation species?" "Affirmative. More significantly, the influence appears to be activating psychological capabilities that enhance rather than diminish social functionality. Species reporting unrest following the transmission are also showing increased creativity indices, improved problem-solving capabilities, and heightened social cooperation within voluntary group structures." Maya stared at her cell's display in amazement. The synthetic intelligence was describing something that sounded less like social disruption and more like awakening. "The mathematical conclusion is unavoidable," Warden Zex-9 stated with artificial clarity. "The human species represents not a threat to galactic civilization, but an opportunity for its evolution. Their psychological patterns, while chaotic and unpredictable, appear to catalyze dormant capabilities in other species that may have been inadvertently suppressed through Federation standardization protocols." The silence in the council chambers stretched for long minutes. Finally, Council Member Linsira spoke the words that Maya had hardly dared to imagine. "I motion that the charges against the human species be dismissed. and that humanity be granted full Federation membership without modification requirements. Seconded, came the gravelly voice of Forge Master Thok. Thirded, sang Deep Singer Morthal, their translated harmonics carrying notes of joy that Maya didn't know their species was capable of expressing. The vote, when it came, was closer than Maya had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 47 species voted for humanity's acceptance, 31 voted for modification protocols, and only 18 voted for extinction. The Federation, for the first time in its 10,000-year history, had chosen change over stability. As the council session concluded, and Maya watched the representatives begin what looked like spontaneous celebrations rather than orderly adjournment, Warden Zek's 9 voice spoke directly to her cell. Prisoner H7749, you are hereby released from custody and granted diplomatic status as humanity's first official representative to the Federation Council. Transportation to the council chambers will be provided immediately. Maya stood up slowly, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. She had expected to die in this cell, had made peace with the sacrifice she thought she was making for her species. Now she was being told that not only had humanity been saved, but she was being offered a chance to represent them in the galactic community. The energy barrier of her cell deactivated for the final time, and Maya stepped out into the corridor where a very different reception awaited her. Instead of Krillian guards with plasma rifles, she was met by a delegation of beings from a dozen different species, all of whom seemed eager to speak with her about concepts that the Federation had thought safely buried: freedom, choice, creativity, and the right to be different. As they escorted her toward the shuttle that would take her to the council chambers, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had been captured as a prisoner, convicted as a terrorist, and scheduled for execution as a threat to galactic order. But through it all, she had remained fundamentally human. She had refused to accept impossible choices, had found opportunity in desperate circumstances, and had inspired others to remember what they had given up in exchange for security and stability. The Federation had thought they were dealing with a single dangerous individual. They had discovered instead that humanity's greatest threat to their ordered society was also its greatest gift, the reminder that being alive meant more than just surviving, and that freedom was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Maya smiled as the shuttle lifted off from the detention facility, carrying her toward a future that nobody could have predicted or planned. The galaxy was about to become a far more interesting place, and for the first time in 10,000 years, that was exactly what it needed. Behind them, the detention facility continued its operations, but with a significant change. The isolation wing that had been designed to break the spirits of dangerous individuals was being converted into something new, a place where beings from across the galaxy could come to remember what it meant to dream, to question, to hope for something better than what they had been told was possible. Humanity had not just survived their encounter with the Federation. They had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten, that the most dangerous and wonderful thing any being could be was truly, authentically free.